Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Gustavo Saltiel, and I am the Global Lead for Water Supply and Sanitation at the World Bank, and I am pleased to be your moderator for today. Thank you for joining this important and timely session, looking at how megacities are tackling a growing number of complex shocks and stresses while fulfilling their mandate to ensure water supply and sanitation services for a growing urban population. Today, we will be looking at how SABESP, the water supply and sanitation utility of the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil, which directly provides services to approximately 30 million people in the metropolitan region of Sao Paulo and beyond, deals with these critical situations. Many cities face recurrent stresses such as water shortages that may lead to intense droughts. We saw this with the 2014-2015 drought that deeply affected the metropolitan area of Sao Paulo, becoming one of the most serious droughts in recorded history. In February 2015, the total water volume in the reservoirs of the metropolitan area of Sao Paulo was at 22% of its capacity. SABESP, the utility, was able to tackle the drought through a series of structural and non-structural measures. Today, and in addition to this crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is preventing us from having a more traditional Seaweed Water Week, offers a cautionary tale about the need to prepare for an uncertain future with unexpected challenges. Utilities across the world, including SABESP, have had to adapt their processes to meet water demand and address other challenges emerging from the COVID-19 crisis. The challenges that SABESP has had to overcome to ensure water supply for the state of Sao Paulo are faced by many other utilities across the world. I look forward to the discussion that we'll have today, accompanied by a great set of speakers that I will present now. We will first listen to a keynote speech by Benedito Braga, the Chief Executive Officer and President of SABESP. Benedicto is a civil engineer from the University of Sao Paulo, master in hydrology from Stanford University, and master in hydraulics from Sao Paulo University, as well as a PhD in water resources from Stanford University as well. He was the president of the World Water Council between 2013 and 2018, and is currently its honorary president. Before, he had different high-level positions, including as Secretary of Water Resources and Sanitation, also in the state of Sao Paulo. He was co-president of the organizing committee for Brazil and Korea of the World Water Forums in 2015 and 18, and president of the France World Water Forum in 2012. He has had other high-level positions in UNESCO, president of the International Water Resources Association, and also director of the Agência Nacional, the Water National Agency of Brazil, and he's also professor in the University of Sao Paulo. We will then be joined by Jennifer Sara and Nora Lambrecht for a discussion panel. Jennifer Sara is the Global Director of the Water Practice at the World Bank. She joined the bank in 1993, and since then she has held numerous technical, managerial, and leadership positions, including in Brazil and in Vietnam. And since 2014, she's the Global Director of the Water Global Practice. That is the organizational structure that Jennifer has led from its inception, and that brings the different facets of water together under a comprehensive vision designed around three pillars: sustain water resources, deliver services, and build resilience, the three that are very relevant for our discussion today. In addition, Jennifer holds high-level positions in different international organizations, including as governor of the World Water Council, and has recently been recognized as one of the water industry's top 5 most influential women by Global Water Intelligence. Nora Lambrecht is a climate risk officer at the Division of Environmental, Social, and Governance Affairs at the IDB, Inter-American Development Bank Invest. Previously, she worked in the development of sustainable practices to mitigate climate change and the implementation of circular economy strategies at Heidelberg Cement. Nora has an interdisciplinary background, and in addition to having a degree in economics from the University of Cambridge, she studied energy and climate policies and international relations at SOAS London, UC Berkeley, and the University College of Maastricht. Nora is part of the Global Shapers community and initiative of the World Economic Forum. After the interventions from Ben Braga and our panelists, we will have time for questions and answers. Please use the chat box on the right of your screen throughout the session to share your questions and comments. I look forward to productive discussions, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ben Braga. Thank you. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you, Gustavo, for the introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be in this virtual SEWE World Water Week. I'm going to speak, as you mentioned, about the crisis, the hydrologic crisis that we went through 2014, 2015, and how we are working with the challenge of COVID-19 in the Sao Paulo area, specifically in the metropolitan area. So next, please. Can you move? Yeah, okay. So for those of you not familiar with geography of Sao Paulo, here's the map and the situation of the sea surface anomaly temperatures before the crisis of 2014. And you can see the southeast region of Brazil, how it was affected. The warmer colors show the drought that took place starting in 2014. Next, please. Here is an aerial photo of the metropolitan region of Sao Paulo. It is supplied by 8 systems with a nominal capacity of 75.8 cubic meters per second and a population of 21 million people. Next, please. Here's how the depletion of the Cantareira system took place. We started in January 2014 at 45%, and in January of 2015 we were at 5% of the storage in the Cantareira system. You can see by the picture there, the situation was very complex. Next, please. Yeah, here another picture showing the complexity, and in the bottom of this slide, you can appreciate the system is made of 4 reservoirs that are interconnected by tunnels, and this in the final reservoir you have a pumping station that puts up the water 150 meters, and this system was serving 8 to 9 million people before the crisis. Next, please. Here is just for you to appreciate the severity of the crisis. In green, you have the average inflows to the Cantareira system, and this is based on 84 years of data. And then the largest drought we have been through in this record of almost 100 years of data in 1953 and 1954 in blue. And then what happened during 2014, 2015, we had only 24% of the inflows compared to the average. We estimated in 0.4% the probability of this situation to happen again. Next, please. So the strategy we had to implement was to put in what we call resilient infrastructure that increased the production of bulk water and storage, that interconnected these main producing systems. As I mentioned, we have 8 water production systems that were not interconnected before the crisis. And then we started civil works to have interbasin transfers. We started also to put pressure reduction valves in our systems to control the pressure and so reducing leakages. And we implemented some economic incentives so that people would reduce their consumption. And this was also a very important non-structural measure that we implemented. Oh, my presentation disappeared from my... Okay, now it's back. Okay, and then we started also to use the DAD storage of the Cantareira system. And, you know, the use of this word, DAD storage, some people started thinking that the water was of bad quality. But this is a nomenclature from the hydroelectric system. When you use water from the bottom of the reservoir that is reserved for sediment that is going to come into the reservoir during its lifetime. Next, please. Okay, so we started this bonus program giving discounts in the water bills to people to incentivize them to use less water, to use it more rationally. 80% of the population joined the efforts for rational water use. The total cost of this operation was $200 million, and we saved 332 million cubic meters. So the per capita consumption decreased from 160 before the crisis to 118 during the crisis. Next, please. So here are the interconnections in the map. You can see how the different systems, mainly Alto Tietê, Guarapiranga, and Cantareira, they started to serve areas from the other systems. So we reduced the use of the Cantareira system. Before 2013, we were able to transfer 3 cubic meters from the systems. Now we are able to transfer 8 cubic meters from different systems. And in the right side, you can appreciate the size of the civil works that were necessary to be done at record time. Next, please. Here is how the economic, water losses, unaccounted for, and leakage. We came to leakages of the order of 17%. Just for you to have an idea, in Japan, it's the most efficient, 7%, UK 16%, and France 26% is the water leakage in their systems. Next, please. Here's are some pictures of the size of the infrastructure that was developed. Next, please. And here is how the system developed, coming down to use that storage, and then how it recovered from that situation. Next, please. And here is the same intake in 2014. You can see it absolutely dried. And in 2016, in its normal situation. Next, please. This is also for you to appreciate the operations, the civil works that were developed very quickly. Next, please. Reservoirs, water supply stations, that water supply plants that were using membrane technology. Next, please. And here is how important was pressure control and the bonus program in red, and reduction in bulk water provision. Next, please. Here is the interbasin transfers that were put in place, very large civil works that were done in record time in order to supply this infrastructure that was necessary to cope with the challenge. Next, please. And here is very interesting. You can see from 2014 to November 2019. And in blue are the water levels in the Cantareira system. And as you can appreciate in orange, in the color orange, the levels of the Cantareira system in November 2019 would reach the dead storage if it weren't for the civil works and the new behavior of the population in consuming water. So we were able to keep the reservoir at 38% of its storage. So as you can see, these situations are recurring more frequently now. This is what we say, that climate change is already happening regardless of what the reasons for climate change are. We can see that in a very short period of time, we had a severe situation similar to that. So the importance of resilient infrastructure, the importance of rational water use is very clear, demonstrated in this slide. Next, please. And here is the pandemic that came in, that was not only a health problem, but in less developed countries like ours, the economic situation is very important. People had to have social distancing, commerce, industry, and services were reduced, and people, the poorer people, were most impacted. So SABESP started helping these poor people by doing some important mechanisms. Please, next. So economic aid. In the people that use the so-called social tariff, they were exempted for paying for their bills. This affected 2.5 million people. For 4 months in a row, we exempted them from paying the bills. Next, please. We started this virtual customer services because our agencies were closed due to the pandemic. Next, please. Water tanks were very important because of pressure reduction in the shanty towns, in the poorer communities. Next, please. We also had in these cleaning squads to reduce the chances of contamination by coronavirus. Next, please. We provided wash basins in the poorer communities as well. Next, please. We also provided food and hygiene kits, baskets, to the poorer population because they were jobless and sometimes they didn't have nothing to eat. Next, please. And the Agua Legal program that we have in partnership with the World Bank, where we are putting water in the poorer communities, where in the shanty towns, where all the you can see in the picture there those hoods that take water from our mains. These are stealing water, and now we are making it correctly, putting water meters, and people are paying much less than they paid for those that were making the fraud and selling the water for them. So that's why it's called Legal Water Program. And this is a very good partnership that we have with the World Bank, and we, are now making it a larger program through the cooperation with the World Bank. So this is in the 15 minutes that I had, Gustavo, but I hope I used the 1 minute more, but I apologize for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for the great presentation, and the 1 minute is very well deserved. Your presentation reinforces the need for enhancing resilience of utilities and water supply and sanitation systems, systems in general, and shows the great work that SABESP is doing to tackle the shocks and stresses that threaten the reliable water supply in Sao Paulo. From this presentation, I would like to draw 3 key messages that I think are embedded in the presentation, Ben. One, the importance of infrastructure, of course, but also of non-structural measures and green solutions to address the increasing climate risks and water scarcity. 2, the renewed attention to water supply and sanitation given the COVID crisis and the programs that SABESP is deploying. And 3, the importance of having a robust policy, institutional, and regulatory system in place. And so I would like to ask Jennifer and Nora to reflect on these 3 key points, but also to reflect on Ben's presentation in general. So let me turn now to Jennifer from the World Bank.
Thank you so much, Gustavo, and good morning and hello, everyone, at this very strange virtual Water Week. I'm sorry we're not all in Stockholm. On the other hand, many more people can join, and it's really delightful to see so many people online. It's a pleasure to be able to follow and comment on Honorable Ben Braga's presentation and all the great work they're doing in SABESP, and to serve on this panel with our colleague from IDB. Gustavo, I think you really did hit the nail on the head. These are 3 very, very important topics that do emerge from the experience of SABESP. Let me just take each one one by one and say a little bit more what we're doing in this area at the World Bank in the water global practice. In terms of resilient infrastructure, as SABESP's experience shows, low probability events are not impossible. And we really do want to congratulate SABESP on avoiding the day 0 scenario. And that was a couple of years ago. But now on top of it, we bring in the COVID. And to see what you've done, Ben, to really take care of people during the COVID crisis is inspiring. So thank you for that. During these crises, we see that managing supply and demand is critical. And congratulations on the 17% water loss, which is a real target for you to manage utility more efficiently. But then we're understanding from your presentation and others the importance of also looking beyond the pipes and the pumps to look at the resilience of the water resource itself. So now we really need to rethink our approach. And the way that we've done planning for infrastructure delivery in the past is not going to serve us in the future. We're used to looking at past historical data on hydrology and weather events, but obviously with all these changes, and including with the pressures of the pandemic, we really need to look at a different way of planning of helping utilities make decisions on uncertainty. So we are developing a roadmap to help utilities minimize service disruption in the face of climate and non-climatic hazards. It builds a lot on the work of the integrated urban water management of the past, and looks at resilient infrastructure design briefs that look at different scenarios and provide a diversification in supply options, which is very important. And as Gustavo mentions, it's very important for us to also consider nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, and to incorporate the principles of circular economy, where you could treat wastewater as a resource rather than simply a pollution load. And we also learned from Sao Paulo the importance of working across sectoral boundaries and outside of the city limits, and to look at the watershed behind the city. The second point is on WASH and health. And this is what COVID has told us, is that we really need to go back to what the universal access to water and sanitation. The pandemic shows us, we're telling people to wash their hands, yet 2 in 5 healthcare facilities, 2 in 5 schools across the developing world do not have access to water and sanitation facilities. That's 40%. So we really need to make sure there is universal access to water and sanitation. This is a political commitment that needs to be made at the national level, at the regional level, at local level, and globally. So we are working with the UN agencies on an SDG 6 accelerator framework to leverage this high-level political commitment. But linked to that, we also need to keep on the agenda of climate change. And so we're supporting the Global Commission on Adaptation to partner with key stakeholders, including with CIWI, with the World Economic Forum, Government of the Netherlands, World Water Resources Group, and others, to really make sure that the Water Action Track and urban water resilience is included in the provisions when we think about climate change adaptation and the political leadership at the global level. But of course, this political leadership means nothing if it's not turned into action. And finally, Gustavo, I mean, I can't be preaching to you because you are the person in our practice who leads the work on the basics, how to make sure that we go back to building a solid foundation for utility management, policies, institutions, and regulations that enable utilities to thrive, to innovate, and to have cost recovery. So at the end of the day, as Ben put forward very well, this is about people. It's people who depend on access to water supply and sanitation for the health and livelihoods. And again, I want to thank SABESP and recognize their great work, because we build on what you do to work across the world in other utilities. We're now implementing a Utility of the Future framework in over 15 countries with a common methodology to help utilities build their resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. And now I would like to hand it over to Nora Lambrecht from the Inter-American Development Bank.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone wherever you are. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to speak about this very important topic. And yeah, as Ben so greatly put it, you really cannot talk about water management without talking about the climate crisis as well. So I would like to spend a couple of minutes to reflect on that, because indeed the connection of water and climate change is so pronounced wherever you look. And yeah, perhaps, of course, when it comes to utilities and infrastructure especially. The physical impacts of climate change and of the climate-water nexus, as Ben also said, then they're not just going to be somewhere in the future. They are already there. And most strikingly, these impacts manifest themselves at both extremes. So on the one hand, we see, like we just saw in the case study, we see water scarcity as a result of droughts, as a result of changes in precipitation patterns, which is generally very pronounced in Latin America and the Caribbean as a result of changes in the El Nino weather pattern. But then on the other hand, sometimes in the same country at the very same time, you see floodings, you see flash floods, you see landslides. So when we talk about managing water, we also need to talk about managing the climate crisis. And as Jennifer also pointed to, for that, infrastructure, resilient infrastructure is key. We always used to talk about quality infrastructure, but really quality infrastructure is sustainable infrastructure, is climate resilient infrastructure. And to get there, climate risk management is key. So at IDB Invest, which is the private sector financing arm of the Inter-American Development Bank, we've now incorporated climate risk screening into our project analysis to make sure that the projects that we are financing are not only financially viable, but that they are also resilient to climate change and that they do not exacerbate the climate crisis from an emissions perspective. So in that respect, it's really financial risk management and climate risk management. It's really two sides of the same coin. Because if we don't manage the climate crisis and if we don't manage water scarcity, as Ben also alluded to, then we're going to have severe financial issues in the private sector and for countries at large. Of course, this is easy in theory to say, okay, let's just do climate risk management. But the crux here is really the non-stationarity of it and looking at a variety of scenarios. Because so although we already know that the climate crisis is of course happening, we don't know exactly how it's going to manifest itself at the local level. And of course, water is so local, how it's going to manifest itself there in the future. So when conducting climate risk management as a private sector or as a bank considering financing the private sector or as a government, this spanning of a realm of multiple scenarios is so important in order to make sure that the infrastructures that we're building are not just resilient to one scenario, to one possible future, but to many. And I really think the great news here is that nature is our helper. My favorite nature-based solution perhaps is mangroves, because they have this amazing double benefit, right, of sequestering carbons and helping infrastructures and protecting them really against floods, against hurricanes and so forth. So yeah, these are my 2 cents on the climate crisis and in relation to water management. And I would like to make one last point here, financing the private sector. I would like to make one last point on the private sector. So while governments and while regulation, of course, builds the enabling conditions and is crucial to provide the framework, the private sector really has this role and this opportunity to accelerate the transition. I think often we talk, when we talk about water scarcity and the climate crisis, we talk about it as a risk. And I also just talked about climate risk management, and it certainly is. It might be the greatest risk of the 21st century, but it's also an opportunity. There are great savings that can be made from doing prudent water management. There are amazing savings opportunities from actually investing in resilient infrastructure. Often when you do an analysis of a project and look at, okay, should I upgrade an existing infrastructure and make it more resilient, there are nearly always no regret opportunities. And the cost-benefit case, when you actually do analyze it, is very clear. So beyond the water utility space, perhaps, so we've been actually looking at 2 ports projects, one in Mexico, the Puerto Manzanillo, and one in Ecuador, Puerto Pozoja, where we've done such an analysis on climate change. And it became clear very quickly that the business case for investing in resilient infrastructure is a no-brainer, and that if we put our money to where our mouth is, that then yeah, we really create a business case and make sure that we have the environmental sustainability in mind as well. So perhaps ending with this, I guess the best time to invest in resilient infrastructure and to stop the climate and water crisis was years ago, but the second best time is now. So let's make sure that when we invest in greenfields, we make it resilient, we make water management and climate resilience a priority, and that we also make sure that when we upgrade and when we consider upgrading existing infrastructures, we really look at all the costs associated with it to ensure that there's a business case. Thanks.
Thank you, Nora, for your insightful intervention, highlighting not only the climate risks, but also financial risks and management of those risks, and associating them with non-structural and green solutions and the possible participation of the private sector here. So we are now moving into a time for questions and answers, and I would like to start, first of all, to ask two questions that just came up to Ben. One is if the metropolitan region of Sao Paulo, and SABESP, of course, has looked at creating new water sources, for example, to increasing the menu of options for water supply, for instance, reusing treated wastewater. So that's one question for you, Ben, and I will also read the second question. How much incremental investment was required to build the civil works to improve the water supply resilience as you described? So two questions. One, incremental investments, and second, the possibility of increasing the menu of options for water supply, including reuse of wastewater.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the question. Absolutely, we are already at SABESP using this technology of water reuse. Approximately 1,000 liters per second of water provided to the industrial complex of ABC in the south part of the metropolitan region is served with reused water that comes from our sewage wastewater treatment plant in Santo André. In Santo André. But we put the present value of the investment in going through reuse and the interbasin transfers, and it showed that this infrastructure was more interesting from a financial and economic point of view. And also these plants for reuse of water would not provide that much of water needed to build exactly a resilient system. But of course, we have plans on the circular economy that our panelists put a very important point. We are planning to use our sludge from our wastewater treatment plants to produce energy in the future. Today, we have some plants in where we already produce biogas, and we use this biogas for our cars in the city of Franca, in the countryside of Sao Paulo. Now, regarding incremental costs, we estimated some $200 million US that I mentioned during my presentation. Maybe it was very fast, and I apologize for that.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you also for alluding to the circular economy approaches, as Jennifer was also mentioning. The fact that you are recovering biogas and using it for your fleet is a great achievement for SABESP. We have a few other questions. One for Nora. If IDB Invest is using the environmental, social, and governance framework analysis when considering investments, and what do you think? What's your view about doing it for water projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we do as IDB Invest in terms of ESG analysis is using the performance standards of the International Finance Corporation. the IFC performance standards and also the World Bank guidelines. So we're very closely aligned there. And that of course means that water takes center stage in Performance Standard 3, for instance. So we very closely look at the resource efficiency and the environmental impacts of any project. And that means not only looking at quantitative data, but also looking at, especially at management systems and at strategies to reduce impacts. It's a bit hard to give an overall analysis because any ESG analysis depends so much on the local context, whether there is biodiversity involved there, whether there are critical social contexts, for instance, indigenous peoples in the area, whether people need to be relocated and so forth. So we do take all these issues into account and do a materiality analysis in the beginning and then really drill into the issues that are material. So in the case of water utilities, that could be, for instance, drawing on reports from independent engineers to make sure that everything's being built in a resilient way, looking at the environmental impacts, but also the social ones. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Nora. Jennifer, Ben Braga presented the cutting-edge activities undertaken by SABESP in the context of the water crisis. So we wanted to ask you how you see experiences like this informing programs undertaken by other countries and how the World Bank can facilitate the exchange of relevant experiences.
Yeah, thank you, Gustavo. I mean, that's really what our function is as the World Bank, is not, to support governments design and invest and finance infrastructure projects in water and sanitation solutions, but more importantly as well is the knowledge exchange across countries. So we've taken a lot of the experience from SABESP, also from Cape Town. I remember a couple of years ago, under the water shortages, we went to Boaké in Côte d'Ivoire, where they were having a crisis in a secondary city, a major drought. And so just the tools that came out of it about how do you manage supply, how do you manage the demand at the same time, and really the consumer interface, how important that was to immediately respond to the crisis, but at the same time also think about diversification of supplies and going forward. But let me give you an example from COVID just very recently. I mean, obviously with the COVID pandemic, things have become very different. Water utilities are getting very squeezed as they're not recovering as many revenues as in the past, and governments are rightfully so mandating to make sure water services don't get cut off, especially to the poorest. So, for example, working in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, helping them to address and work with the health sector to secure the hotspots in the cities, like SABESP has done, make sure water is flowing where you have the most urban density, where you have hotspots of COVID, where you most need them, and also to increase their supply through boreholes and in different parts of the city where you need them. So again, that's very important to take the lessons of how you can work with the utilities to make sure that they're functioning well, but at the same time can respond to a crisis at the time of the crisis without the utility completely going broke in the future. And I think that's what's important, and those are the lessons. So at the same time in Addis, we're working with them not just on the COVID response, but also how they can also think about the disaster recovery from floods and droughts, which they also face, and optimize the consumption of electricity, for example. The water utility in Addis consumes 30% of the electricity for the city. So if the water utility can really improve its efficiency of use of electricity, that electricity is available to others who don't have electricity services. So that just shows the interlinkages across the sectors and across the services being provided, with the water sector needing to work with electricity, with health, with agriculture, with all the other stakeholders, as we look for universal access to water for all and water for all at all times. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We are about to reach the 6:45, the 45 minutes limit of this session, but we can take a few minutes more. There are many more questions, and I'd like to ask the panelists one from Perry Rivera from Manila Water. Hello, Perry. Good to see you connected. And the question is, given COVID and the economic crisis that have disrupted a lot of governments and utilities, he mentions that there is a need, and this is a bold comment from Perry, there is a need, quoting, to reset the Sustainable Development Goal targets, especially for water and wastewater KPIs. So he's asking the panelists, it's a difficult question, I know, what are your views about this suggestion or this question? Starting by you, Ben, a difficult question. Should we reset the Sustainable Development Goals 6.1 and 6.2?
Oh, no, I think we have to make all efforts, but that it is achieved. The goal. It's not resetting it, but making sure that the politicians understand the importance of water security in the pandemic, in the health system, and the opportunity is now to say, look, see how important it is to have water flowing 24 hours, 7 by 7 in the tap with good quality, so I think all the framework is there. Is just a matter of doing it and involving the private sector. Very important point that Nora brought in, that governments are not very well on these days of lacking liquidity. So very important to have the private sector in and the opportunities for them to make good business with water. Water is a good business. It is important that we give this message.
Thank you, Ben, and I'm sure Perry is very happy with that response about the private sector. So, Nora, what are your views off the record?
Yeah, I would say I don't think we need to completely reset SDG 6 or any SDG targets for that matter. Perhaps it just requires some reframing. I think the great thing about the SDGs is that they are so that they are applicable to every country, to every government, and to the private sector as well, which I think is amazing. And if you, for instance, look at the targets on WASH in SDG 6, these targets do not change. The measures we might need to take in order to achieve them now, bearing in mind COVID, might be different. And perhaps some of the targets have also become more challenging, but I think the goalpost is still the same.
Thank you, Nora. Jennifer.
No, this is a great question, Perry. Thank you. And then I don't think we need to reset SDG 6, but I think what we need to do is maybe reprioritize. In the similar to what Nora has said. I mean, I think it's a really good debate. I mean, do we want to get some really high quality water for all, which SDG 6 raised the bar in terms of how we define access to safe water and clean water and sanitation, or do we want to have maybe a little bit lower quality for everyone? So we can have some quality for few people, but in some places in the world, that's really a trade-off. Or do you have to have maybe a little bit lower quality and a gradual ladder? We talk about the sanitation ladder to get there, to make sure that everyone has a little bit as we strive to achieve the target. I don't think we should get rid of the target, but I agree we need to take political commitment, put it into financing plans and investment plans that make sense, that can actually expand service and coverage as quickly as possible to as many people as possible.
Thank you, Jennifer. And so, in closing, I would like to thank all of you for the great presentations and comments and responding to the questions, but also to the audience for your participation. We have learned a lot from SABESP and from the reflections of the panelists. We learned that SABESP is already what Jennifer was referring to, a utility of the future. I mean, it's doing many things that we expect different utilities to do it. They are doing it today. We have learned how SABESP is working across the 3 dimensions that we highlighted before, including non-structural measures and demand management and regulatory policy and institutional aspects. Utilities of the Future, as Jennifer mentioned, is one of the flagship programs of the World Bank, and so SABESP is very much aligned to that. So we look forward to seeing how SABESP continues to be a success story from which many utilities across the world can learn. Again, I would like to thank SABESP for the organization of this event and the speakers for their participation, and all of you for staying with us, some of us very early morning here in the U.S. There will be surely many more opportunities to continue engaging on this subject during Seaweed Water Week, but also beyond. Have a great day. Thank you.